What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe.
And Amy.
Review. This is our weekly show where we go over the magic stories that are posted on Wizard's website. This, as you can see from the title down below, is the first of the Hour of Devastation stories. This week's story is called The Hour of Revelation, and it's by Alison Luhrs. My quick review at the beginning, right up at the top, this story was great. It was an amazing introduction to Hour of Devastation. It was an amazing follow-up to Amonkhet. If you have been following along with Amonkhet, you can't miss this one. If you're looking to get into Hour of Devastation, this is a great, or into the stories, this is a great way to start. You don't necessarily have to have followed Amonkhet, although it's pretty important. But this story was really good. If you're here because you're a Nicol Bolas fan and didn't really care about Amonkhet because Nicol Bolas wasn't there or wasn't going to be there, this is a good one. You get to hear a lot about Nicol Bolas. So my quick review at the beginning is that it was definitely really good. It's definitely worth your time. Go check it out. And then come back here and watch our review, of course. Thoughts? Agree? Disagree?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, yeah. So that's our quick review at the beginning. Go check that out. This is a review show. We do not summarize.
So please read the story first.
Correct. On to the full review itself. Again, Hour of Revelation by Alison Luhrs. It opens with Nicol Bolas. It opens with flashbacks, which is shown through italicized text. Brilliant storytelling method. Super simple, but a very easy way for us to know, oh, the text isn't italicized anymore. Now we're in the present, and it jumps to Samut and Jeru, and we get to then hear about, it picks up exactly where we left off. And so that was very good. Again, very, very simple fix. Alison is an amazing storyteller, and so she did an awesome job as usual. We start with Nicol Bolas in the beginning. We start with his first arrival on Amonkhet years and years before. And we get to find out that he is kind of in a hurry. And I think you had a little bit of insight in this, which I did not even realize while I was reading it. Amy had to be the one to point it out to me, and maybe I'm just crazy because I don't know how I didn't see it. But
I just assumed that he was preparing for the mending to occur. Because he talked about only having, what did you say, 3 days?
I don't know that I said 3 days. He said only a little while left or only a couple days left.
Whatever the time span was, he was aware of how long he had to hold on to his power before it got taken away from him, basically.
Right. And I don't know why I didn't think it was the mending. It just didn't click in my head, I think. I was just so... I was looking so deep into it and trying to figure out what each little thing meant in terms of Amonkhet that I didn't really look to the Nicol Bolas part and realize, like, oh, clearly.
Yeah, and I mean... I was surprised by that line because I did not at all think that Nicol Bolas knew ahead of time when the mending was going to occur. And maybe he didn't know ahead of time. I don't know if he's like messing with time or like who knows. But it seems like he knew that the mending was coming and he knew that it would alter his power. So he was preparing for it by readying Amonkhet to be his planet or plane or whatever that he was then going to take over and,
remake in his image, basically.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll hear more about his plan in the weeks and stories to come, because there is quite a bit left to this one. And it's interesting that I think this story did a great job overall. It started with Nicol Bolas. It started with giving you background, because that's kind of what this block promised us, was you're going to get Nicol Bolas. We saw Tezzeret. We knew he was working for Nicol Bolas. We knew that we were going to Nicol Bolas's world. We had the horns and everything. So we knew Nicol Bolas was coming. And then Amonkhet shows up, and there's just no Nicol Bolas. There's plenty of Nicol Bolas influence, but there's no Nicol Bolas. Now this story starts, and you have Nicol Bolas, but not in the present day. Not in the stories themselves, at least, or interacting with the current characters, I should say. Because then this story ends with another swerve. When those gates open, Nicol Bolas isn't there waiting as promised. Razaketh is. And the first thing he does is call out Liliana, say he knows where Liliana is, and he drips blood in the water, and we'll get to that in a minute. But, because I don't mean to gloss over it, that's very important, and we will get to that, because there's a lot that I want to unpack with that stuff, and I'm sure Amy does as well.
Definitely.
But in the beginning, we had Nicol Bolas, and we'll get to Razaketh and blood later. In the beginning, it was Nicol Bolas. He shows up on Amonkhet, and we hear that it's kind of from his perspective. Now, what I thought was interesting was Alison did a really good job in this kind of flashback section of never mentioning his name. He was always the dragon. The dragon is doing this. The dragon wanted to do that. The dragon does this. The gods look and they see the dragon coming. Go ahead.
I think it's important for her to say that because, as you said, Nicol Bolas has had different iterations over the years, so I think it kind of helps us place him on the timeline a little bit better.
Okay.
If she does that, and also, there's just lots of other reasons for doing that, but that's the one I wanted to bring up in that moment.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, it looks like Nicol Bolas talks about, the story talks about, the fact that he is here trying to regain his pre-mending powers. And he's fighting, he shows up, and the gods are there, and he's fighting with the gods, but it's not really a fight, right? Like, a fight, I guess, would imply that it's two-sided, and it's really not. Mm-hmm. There's that old trope from action movies where it's like, you can't fight them, it's 8-on-1, and the solitary person says, yeah, seems like some unfair odds for them, doesn't it? And then he goes out and just ruins all 8 of them. One at one point, and then the rest kind of all at the same time.
Right.
He murders, I don't know, I don't think they mentioned, but like thousands of people, because basically he murders the entire population of Noctamen, as they put it, who were able to walk.
Yeah, so basically if you're a toddler or older, you're dead.
Yep.
Instantaneously.
And we kind of get to find out, and I guess this wasn't a secret, but we kind of get to find out that the gods feel the presence of the population the same way that the population feel the presence of the gods.
Which is very, very cool.
Yes, oh, absolutely. But it shows that, Nicol Bolas murders the super majority of the population, and the gods all feel it to the point where they are kind of stunned and unable to move. Now, I question what was going on in that exact moment. Kefnet was killed. He wasn't killed because he's clearly alive, but he was taken out. His mind was ripped in two to allow Nicol Bolas to break through the Hekma a little bit easier. Nicol Bolas just kind of noticed that Kefnet was the one keeping the barrier up because, as we learned, the Hekma was something pre-Bolas, not from Bolas. We also learned that the desert and kind of everything outside of Noctamen being terrible was also pre-Bolas, because the gods say, and again, something I'm very interested in learning more about, the gods point out that they will stand against this dragon, this interloper, if you will, because Noctamen is the only place left, and they will not lose this time. And they specify this time, mm-hmm. which means that some other crazy stuff has been going on. I don't think it was the demon. I don't think it was Razaketh that did all of that. I think there's a lot more to it. And I don't know what that is. And I want to know what that is, and I hope that, I think, again, as I've said many times, I think it would be foolish if they did not show us what that was. But we shall see.
Yeah, I mean, they made enough references to wastes in the podcast that we should, assume that they're going to eventually give us that information.
Right. And delve into that
or
a
at
little
least give us a little piece here, a little piece there, so that ultimately we can put that puzzle together, even if we're missing a couple of pieces.
Right. And even though this isn't Shadows over Innistrad,
Exactly.
we'll still put the puzzles and the mystery together.
Right.
That's fine.
Give us clues.
But speaking of giving us clues, I need a clue as to what happened with.
Yeah, you do. I'm kidding.
Nothing but love and respect on this show.
Right.
I need to know, or I need a clue as to what happened with the gods. The population was killed. The majority, again, everybody but the
Right.
babies, were killed. And the gods all freeze. Kefnet was already down, but they mentioned that it was all 8 gods, which means it was even the mystery 3 that were
Right.
there before. So it was all 8 of them. Kefnet goes down, so there's 7 left. The population is then murdered by Nicol after he gets through the Heckma. All of them are frozen because the gods have that connection to the populace. They lose that connection, and so they're kind of frozen. They're somewhat paralyzed with fear, with shock, with whatever, with grief and loss even. And yet, Hazaret and Oketra move away. Right? Hazaret leans down, picks up Oketra, and walks off. Does that mean that Hazaret has a special ability that allows her to not be affected by that stuff? Did her picking up Oketra allow Oketra to move? Or were both of them less affected than the rest of the gods? Why those two? Is it because they're female? Bantu's also female. But then you have the discussion that we've had previously of the fact that in her art, Bantu is genuflecting. She is on one knee with her kind of staff. She is not gold-plated in her face like all of the other gods are, or metallic-faced like the other gods. She is just a crocodile face. Does that in some way affect what happened, or why? We also don't know the nature of the other 3 gods, because they as well were seemingly frozen and unable to move. So it was those 3, it was Ronus, and it was Bantu, who were unable to move after the populace was destroyed, whereas Oketra and Hazaret get to move away. Nicol follows them and destroys their minds as well, and those 2 go down, and then that's when it kind of gets into, Nicol saying, all right, I've got some things to do, and you find out the rest of his plan. But it doesn't answer my question of what happened to those other gods. Why were Oketra and Hazaret special? Or just Hazaret and she picked Oketra to help her because they were also the only ones who fought, at least when Nicol first showed up. Mm-hmm. Hazaret pulled out her spear, Oketra shot Nicol with her bow. Maybe Oketra was the only, or Oketra and Hazaret are the only ones with any, distance-based attacks, and so they could do it from far away. Kefnet kind of really didn't get a chance because he was too busy keeping up the Heckma. But what about the other 5? That is the question that I leave here with.
Well, maybe that kind of goes back to what each of the gods stand for.
Well, Ronus is the god of strength, so I don't know that that's true. Because then why wouldn't Ronus want to prove his strength by taking down an invading presence in a dragon?
Even if he didn't, that would definitely be helpful.
Right.
Proving is one thing, but...
Or using it, utilizing it.
Just being helpful
Yeah.
is helpful.
Yeah, and it's... so I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, there's something weird there that I guess they're going to explain, but...
I hope so.
They said that they were sisters, which was cool.
They are, and I mean, it seems like that makes sense, right? They're all just giant god figures on the plane, and so, you could either take that as... they are actual siblings as we understand siblings, or you take it as kind of the fact that religious groups usually call other men and women their brothers and sisters in their faith, or both.
I would assume that they're actually siblings. I assume that goes back to the Egyptian gods that they're based on.
Yeah, I mean, that's a possibility. And
if they are based on very specific ones.
Right. And I mean,
I assume they are.
In a lot of popular polytheistic religions, you see that the gods are kind of related to one another, or they all kind of come from the same ilk, because then they are, again, able to be gods and rule together. And you also get that interesting back and forth of siblings squabbling and things like that, which we have not seen here, but you see that in other, again, traditional polytheistic godlike stories. But, speaking of, and this was not an intended transition, but speaking of other religions and parallels to other religions, we had the demon show up. And the demon comes through the gate, and they showed a picture of the demon being Razaketh, one of Liliana's demons, as we know, and we finally see him showing up, coming through the gate to the afterlife from the other side. And he comes through, and the first thing he does is he rakes his arm and lets the blood that pours out drip into the Luxor River, which is the River Nile.
Yeah. So in other words, the lifeblood of the city.
Right. And he then very appropriately turns the lifeblood of the city into actual blood. So his couple of drops of blood transformed the entirety of the river. As they put it, his blood slowed the river, and then his blood moved upstream to coat the rest of it and to fill the rest of it and turn it all into blood. Alison did an amazing job of describing the fish bubbling to the surface and gasping for air, the eels, the crocodiles.
Well, they didn't gasp for air.
Well,
they gasped for water.
Right. Gasping for being able to breathe and sustain themselves. And blood does not do that, because, as it mentioned, then it began to coagulate, and it was not free flowing. Yes, it was no longer free flowing, and we got to see that awesome picture of the boats in the water kind of being overcome by bloody water and stuff like that, which is just amazing. It was, again, Alison does an amazing job of describing so vividly and painting that picture for you, and you get to hear about the creatures that are there, right? The crocodile comes out and tries to, burping up or spitting up all that blood, collapsing on top of all of the other creatures, pushing them further into the blood, killing them faster. Just such an amazing description. And then once again, because she's the brains, Amy points out to me, she's like, wasn't that one of the plagues? And I looked it up. Not only was it one of the plagues, now if you're not familiar, in the Bible, there are plagues. In fact, there are 10 plagues that the Lord brings down upon the Egyptians.
Technically, it's the Old Testament, but yes.
Correct. Yes, the Old Testament of the Bible, yes.
Or the Torah.
Correct. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. And the 10 plagues are brought down. And the first plague is the river turning to blood. In fact, water in general turning into blood. I apologize. And there are 9 others, as is written, and we looked them up. Frogs is number 2. Lice is number 3. The traditional way, at least here in the States, that I have heard it, or that we have heard it, is the flies come, but there was a discussion online of the fact that there are some
different interpretations
and
of
translations
that plague.
That it could be a mixture of wild animals, or again, as we have heard it more commonly referred to as flies.
Dangerous animals, a mixture of dangerous animals, or flies, depending on who translates it. Yeah. Right.
Then the diseased livestock, which we were not so sure how that would translate to Amun-Ket, because we have not seen livestock. Maybe they exist and we just haven't heard about them, but we haven't heard about them, because seemingly anything that needs to be done is just done by the anointed. And, I guess that's possible, that since they are the workhorses, they are the, that maybe they are the ones who become diseased,
Do you remember what animals were in that card?
The Vizier of the Menagerie?
Yeah.
There was like a deer in there and some smaller critters. It didn't seem like domesticated livestock by any means.
Yeah.
So yeah, and again, the vizier himself was or herself was a Naga, a snake person. So then you have boils, a thunderstorm of hail, locusts, 3 days of darkness, and then the death of the firstborn children in the house. And so those are the 10 plagues. It's interesting. I usually talk about this at the end, but I'll throw it in here. The title of this story was the Hour of Revelation.
Yes.
The final book of the Bible. New Testament, since we're talking about specifics in Testaments, the final book of the Bible in the New Testament is called Revelations, and it talks about the altering of the world during the apocalypse, basically, and the end of the world, which seemingly is what we are going into for Amun-Ket, or at least it'll look that way to the citizens because a demon just showed up and turned their river to blood. And again, in this, the final city on the plain that is not just a decrepit desert. And so you have that reference in just the word revelation.
Right.
That leads you to the thought of the Bible, the New Testament, the final book, the end, the apocalypse. And then you have a reference to the Old Testament, an earlier book. I want to say Exodus, but I am not a theologist, but I think it's Exodus, with the 10 plagues. And
I don't know this one, sorry guys.
I really do. I think it's
I
Exodus.
just don't know the names of the books.
Yeah.
You know, I was able to identify, that's one of the plagues, but I don't know the names of the books offhand, unfortunately.
As always, if you know, let us know. But like I said, I'm relatively sure it's Exodus. And you have these 10 plagues that are being referenced in at least so much as the first one now has occurred. Will we see all 9? All the remaining 9? I doubt it.
I don't think so. I don't think they're gonna be able to figure out a way to make those 9 happen.
No, and you want to know why I don't? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
But I think some iteration of those 9 might occur. So, instead of the livestock one, they might do something that is actually feasible for
like with the anointed. If the anointed becomes sick, because they're the ones that do all the work.
They'll figure some way to make it happen. Or maybe it was just a cute, I shouldn't call that cute, because it wasn't, but callback kind of a thing, just to kind of show a beginning and an end happening at the same time. A
little wink and a nudge kind of a thing.
Yeah, sort of a nod to maybe even multiple religions all at once, and sort of a marker of a beginning and an end sort of coming together, which they did reference a lot in those other stories when they were talking about the serpents eating their own tails and things like that.
Correct.
Making the infinity symbol and stuff like that.
Right.
That apparently, because I looked it up after we did JaAR and found out that that was an ancient Egyptian symbol that meant eternity, that meant a beginning and an end being cyclical, that meant, if it kind of extended into Asian cultures and stuff like that, instead of it being serpents, it would be dragons, and it would be sort of a chi thing, or like a yin yang kind of a thing. Those sorts of things that have always been sort of part of every religion and culture and society, and civilization kind of throughout history, as it's just one other symbol to kind of signify the light and the dark, the good and the evil, the beginning and the end, destruction, creation, those sorts of things.
Yes, and if you want to look up that information for yourself, if you're unfamiliar with what Amy is referring to, you can look up Ouroboros. Ouroboros. Boros, like the white-red guild from Ravnica. But yes, Ouroboros. Ouroboros. And that is where that information comes from. And again, I didn't know that name. That was still from her looking it up. She's the smart one, as I've pointed out. But we have these 10 plagues, and the other thing that I found interesting about the 10 plagues is, and I don't know whether I like it or not. I'm not sure how I fall. They've started with the first plague. I agree with Amy. Will they do all 10? I doubt it. Will they maybe do subtle nods to some of the other ones? Sure, maybe. But I don't think, or at least I hope, that they didn't write themselves into a corner like they did with Story Spotlight cards. We've talked about Story Spotlight cards, and I have talked about how I'm not a big fan of them rushing through any of the 5 Story Spotlight cards, because as they themselves, they being Wizards of the Coast story team, have pointed out, there are certain story moments that are critical, that are crucial. In Amonkhet, I think there were 2 of them that weren't as crucial. In Anointed Procession and By Force. We didn't need to see those. We heard about them, and it could have been any other moment that would have been just as impactful for us to see as a Story Spotlight, and it didn't need to be those 2.
I don't think you mean that. I think that what you mean to say is that they didn't execute them well enough to make them worth it. I think that those elements, if you're looking at the story as a whole from a distance, I think that you have to agree that those are the spotlights if you're to pick them.
I'll agree.
But I think that I agree with you in that they needed to have been focused on and written in a way that made them live up to the fact that they're spotlights, if that makes sense.
I'll agree with you in so much as Anointed Procession was important. It was Gideon's awakening. It was Gideon's realization of, oh my God, all of these deaths were for nothing. They just did it to then bring these bodies so that they could turn them into mummies and use them as anointed. And how stupid is that? And that's the reason behind all this. That's the reason why I just went through this trial of ambition and watched all these good people die in front of me, bringing back all this trauma.
Not just good people, but incredibly skilled people and people who were part of his team.
Right, and warriors and people who
People like him.
And people who he kind of swore to protect,
Right.
even if that was just he internally swore. So Anointed Procession is fine, even though it immediately followed Cruel Reality and was seconds after and was totally glossed over in the stories. By Force, on the other hand, I didn't see that as an important story moment.
Yeah.
The Gatewatch broke the dissenters out of their prison, talked to them for 5 seconds, and then the gods showed up and took them out anyway, and still brought them to where they were gonna bring them before the Gatewatch kidnapped them, or saved them. So what was the point of the Gatewatch saving them in the first place?
I think that was really important for specific reasons, and I can get into those specific reasons if you want. But again, the way it was written took away from that importance. It was important because you had to see that the Gatewatch and the gods were aligned in their thinking.
But were they? Because all of the people who participated in Hazaret's trial at the end were kind of brainwashed into doing so.
Yeah.
So I don't know that that's true.
Well, I think that they all agreed that those people and those things had to come out.
But the gods weren't taking them out.
Moment.
But the gods weren't taking them out because they needed to be freed. They were taking them out because they were part of the final test.
No, I know. But before, they made it seem like that wasn't a normal thing. That they just always took them out
Yeah, it does. It was a normal thing because Samut knew about it and Jeru knew about it.
Okay, because they made it seem like it was because of Nicol Bolas's arrival that they took all of these people out of these sarcophagi.
Well, and so here's why by force makes no sense. Is that it was so contentious, at least again, that maybe it's just the two of us, but it was so inappropriately handled as a story spotlight. And I really don't want to so heavily focus on it because we have a lot more of this story to cover, but it left me with a lot of questions as to why, and that's why I bring it up now, is because if you're truly going to do that, then you're going to limit yourself to having to talk about 5 story spotlight cards and at least touching on them in the story. Don't also give yourself 10 plagues to have to worry about. That seems like way too much, and I don't want them, like I said, to have written themselves into a corner with this by feeling that they have to touch on all of them.
I can agree with that.
There is a saving grace, seemingly, and that saving grace is the archenemy Nicol Bolas set, and more specifically, the archenemy Nicol Bolas schemes. I'm not going to put them up because there are way too many pictures to show you. It would be picture after picture after picture. But if you go and look at the preview, I'm sure that you could Google it, but also Magic's website themselves, there's an article that just goes over the Nicol Bolas archenemy. It's kind of like a preview. And then you can click and see all the schemes, all the art, what all the cards do, and all the flavor text. There are a lot of them, but they're totally worth it. It really shows you Nicol Bolas's personality on Amonkhet. It shows you the people of Amonkhet kind of being messed up by Nicol Bolas.
Oh, yeah.
But more importantly, in those people getting messed up by Nicol Bolas, there are some things in the art.
Lots of great things.
There's one piece of art that blatantly shows flies flying at a citizen of Amonkhet near the top of a spire. That sounds like one of the plagues. There was Hear No Evil, See No Evil, Speak No Evil. The card's called No Evil.
No, it's called No Evil.
It's called No Evil.
No, it's No Evil.
I think it's No Evil. But I could...
No, I think it's No Evil.
All right, well...
We'd have to look at it again. But anyway.
You guys can look that up and see which one of us is right. Again, she's the smart one, so it's probably her. But that's life.
And it looked like there was insects of some kind escaping from the man's eyes.
And whether it was that, whether it was boils or something, and just a weird way of showing it.
I think so.
Okay, so either way, whatever it was, that's what another concept of a plague, if you will, on the people of Amonkhet. The other thing that it showed, and this is something that I kind of hope is not, that is in the stories, despite the fact that it's in archenemy, as opposed to, hey, the plagues are in archenemy at least a little bit, and so we don't need them in the stories, is the 3 Amonkhet gods that Nicol Bolas took. And he said in this story that he took them to use for himself and that they would become important later and that he would utilize them
make
later.
Them his own.
Correct.
Or something.
And we see them in, seemingly, this was not sworn to, but most people agree that that's probably what it is, that's what we see in some of these other schemes, is these hulking, gigantic figures walking around, about the same proportions as Amonkhet gods, but they're a little off. They're a little less regal looking than the gods that we know and that we've
it's
seen.
really more of a silhouette or
just
sandy, windy
conditions. And a lack of form.
Right, so you can't really see what they look like.
Yes. Now, like I said, I hope that we get to see more of the gods and not so much as many of the plagues. I wouldn't mind little nods here and there. As Amy mentioned, I think that's the way to do it. I'm not a writer, and so I'm not a writer for the Magic Story team, I should say, and so I'm not telling them that's what they have to do. That's just from what we've seen so far, that's what I assume they will best be able to do. And as always, I'm willing to be proven wrong on any and all of those points.
Well, I definitely like that they didn't just focus on sort of one culture. Like they kind of led us to believe that when they were doing a set that was supposed to be ancient Egyptian, that it would be very focused on ancient Egyptian culture, and I feel like it really wasn't. I really personally enjoyed, and maybe other people do not because they had that expectation, but I really personally enjoyed the sort of references that were made to lots of other cultures in the stories for this one. Mm-hmm. And I think I really love that a lot of them kind of followed that same sort of timeline, like other cultures that were sort of happening around that same sort of age in time in history, because I think that is so cool. But maybe that's just me. Maybe it made you guys upset. Leave it in the comments if me mentioning, like maybe you didn't even necessarily notice those sort of nods to other cultures in the story, but if you did, or if you listening to me mentioning them kind of made you go, oh, I really wish they hadn't done that. I really wish that they had stuck very closely and strictly to the ancient Egyptian culture as they were working on Amun-Ket. I'd really like to hear that input from you, so...
And if you've been watching JAR, you would know that because Amy talks about it frequently, and that's not a negative at all. It's pointing out all of these parallels that maybe you knew already, but maybe you learned something. And hopefully you did, because it might clue you into something in the future, and that's kind of the most important thing.
Well, the reason why I bring that up is because that fact kind of makes me think that perhaps they won't write themselves into a corner and try to adhere to these expectations of 10 different plagues that they have to just talk about now. I think that they're taking a much looser interpretation of what these things could mean, and making it more meaningful as a result.
Right.
So they're making it more meaningful. They're tapping into a lot of different cultures, and they're making it all work in the fabric of the story in a way that to me is very impressive. That they can do that. They can take bits and pieces from different cultures, and different times, and different different civilizations, different, they're just, it impresses me that they can weave them together in such a way that that they would actually be able to accomplish a nice, cohesive, meaningful story in its own right.
Right.
Using all of those different inspirations.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I would enjoy it either way if they decide to incorporate all of these plagues, or if they decide not to. But I think based on the information that we have already, it's probably safe to assume that they won't.
And based on the way that we've seen, I hope that they don't, only because I'd like them to be able to be more creative and not have to adhere to, well, now we have to write about plague number 4 this week. Like,
right.
I want them to be able to have the freedom to tell the story that they want to tell, as opposed to, hey, isn't it cool we did one plague, now let's do the other 9
Right.
all in a row.
Hey, well, the Bible said let's do these 10.
Right, exactly.
So they don't have to kind of use that as a reference point. They can tap into that slightly if they want to, and then come right back out and really just let the story be as genuine as it needs to be.
Yeah. And the future of the Hour of Devastation story, my guess, because of the way that this story began, it began with Nicol Bolas, it ended with Razaketh calling out Liliana. I'm guessing, at least based on that maybe we're dealing with Razaketh first. Maybe we deal with Razaketh, before Nicol Bolas even shows up. Because as Jeru, I believe it was, pointed out, Razaketh, was supposed to be the final test. And none of the population, seemingly, had seen him up until this point. And now he's here. But is the population going to fight him? Is it just going to be Liliana? Will Jeru and Samut and the like step in and help? We shall see. Like I said, I assume that next week...
Or will Nicol Bolas kind of show up and defeat him to kind of prove, I don't know, that he's a good guy or something to these people that pretty much already believe that that's true? I don't know.
Or will he show up as Liliana is getting close to defeating Razaketh and stop her from doing so,
Right.
thereby creating even further problems on all sides?
Right.
Or none of the above.
Also, when we saw the spoilers for the cards, should we mention that or should we not?
We could talk about it.
Okay.
As far as I understand it, there were 3 cards spoiled, 2 Planeswalkers, 1 in Nicol Bolas, which makes perfect sense, and another, who we'll talk about in a second. And then there was a Bantu's Last Reckoning, I believe is the name of the card, showing Bantu just destroying people, leaning down, screaming. Maybe these I'll put up. If I can find them, they'll be up here so that you guys can see them. Bantu's Last Reckoning, of her kind of throwing people around and screaming. You have Nicol Bolas, God Pharaoh, as we talked about. But the biggest, I think, reveal, at least immediately, maybe Bantu's Reckoning turns into like a huge deal, but as far as I can see, the biggest spoiler so far, that we don't know if it's real yet. I think that it was found, that it was posted to Magic's website and then immediately taken down. At least that's what I've read. And that's how I read it, was that it was posted to their website and then immediately taken down. But of course people took screenshots of it, so they still exist. But it seemed to be accidental, but maybe it was purposeful and not at all accidental. But so far that has not been officially confirmed as true spoilers, although it seems to be that they are true spoilers. But if you have not heard yet, which I would be surprised if you have not, the other Planeswalker that was spoiled was the red-green Planeswalker, Samut. Samut, more specifically Samut the Tested. Again, if I find it, it'll pop up here. And that shows that at some point, Samut gets a spark. Something happens, and we know, just as well as the rest of you know, it's not going to be a surprise birthday party. Something's going to happen to Samut
something bad
that makes her spark up. A lot of people have talked about it. Will it be Jeru's death? Probably. Will it be Jeru getting maybe just injured, but very badly or something?
Or will it just be the frickin' apocalypse?
I don't think so. I think it has to be something, especially in this story, Samut and Jeru, even though Jeru was like, Samut betrayed me and is still a dissenter and is still a heretic, he still followed her. He still did everything that she said.
Because
they stood side by side.
Yeah, because we learned that they love each other.
Yes.
And I think that most of the reason why he was so angry about Samut was because he felt abandoned by her.
Yes, and he didn't want it to be true that she was a betrayer,
right.
But we shall see. We'll see how that works in the coming stories. Like I said, I assume that Razaketh is next and not Nicol Bolas. I assume that Samut is not sparking, if this is true, in the next episode or the next story next week. I wanted to close this one because this has been a long one, but it's been a while since we've talked about a story, and so I wanted to go into it a little bit. I wanted to talk about Alison as the author and give props. I feel like I do it every time we talk about Alison, but I'm going to do it again. I'm assuming most of you are aware, if you follow along specifically, but 3 weeks ago, we had the final Amonkhet story in Judgment, which was written by Doug Beyer, and Alison Luhrs. Half and half. And I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe that the last half of the story was written by Alison. So the last thing that we heard from Amonkhet was Alison. Now the first thing that we hear on for Hour of Devastation is Alison. But that's not it. Because 2 weeks ago, there was the Magic Story podcast, which had Kelly Diggs and Alison. And last week, we had the Commander 2017 story written by Alison. None of these are complaints, by the way.
No.
Because you would think that writer's block is a thing that exists, and they have a full team of writers for their Magic Story. And you would think that they would want to switch it up because you never want someone to get burnt out. I thought
You don't want the story to get stale, and you want to keep variety.
Right, especially in these stories. Some authors, if they write a full series, you're going to hear their voice throughout the series because it's their series of books. And that's never a problem because it's their story to tell. With Magic, they have kind of put forth that you're going to get different forms of storytelling. You're going to get different styles of storytelling and different ways and things that people focus on.
And I think that's great.
That's fine.
I love that.
Absolutely.
But maybe they're trying to keep it more cohesive. I don't know.
But I think that it's great that despite the fact that for the last 4 weeks, the last month, once a week, we have had content, at least in part, from Alison. And I'm not sitting here this week saying, it's very clear that she wrote 4 weeks of content or put herself out there too far.
Alison again.
No,
we're sitting here going, yeah.
Right, because this story
Alison again.
Right,
what's she gonna say this time?
This story was great. Last week's story was great. The Judgment story was great. Her on the podcast was great. And please don't think that's to take nothing away from Doug in the Judgment story, nor is it to take anything away from Kelly or Blake in the podcast, or the rest of the writing team that worked together to say what was gonna be in the stories, and then the author herself or himself or whomever will expand upon that even further. And so, an amazing job. That is not a criticism by any means that it's been Alison for the last month. I love it. We love Alison here. She does an amazing job, just like we love all the other authors that have done.
I did find it interesting, though, that it wasn't James Wyatt who wrote the story because it was so religious. At least I felt it was.
There might be more. There might be something even more religious. James might have been working on the art book or something.
Yeah, that's true.
Because, or any of the other things that he does so well.
Any of the other zillion things and zillion people.
I was going to say that any of the other, of these team members do. And so, again...
Well, and we also... Well, no, never mind.
Okay, so props to Alison, as I said. That was amazingly well done for the last month we've been with her. Only because I appreciate variety. I hope that the story next week is someone else. Not because I think Alison has done a bad job by any means, but because it's nice to get variety in our storytelling, and because at this point I'm relatively certain that will be the case. If not, I'm still wide open to hearing an amazing story, and it will be no matter who tells it, I'm sure.
Yeah, maybe she just, begged some people for Amonkhet to be her thing, that she just sat there and wrote stories about that plane.
It's definitely possible.
They figured out how to incorporate as much as they could from her.
It's definitely possible.
We'll see.
Yes. But this has been another episode of JaAR. Thank you guys so much for watching all the way through, because this was a long one, and we apologize for that. It was a lot to talk about. We hope that you enjoyed, and thank you, if you are watching this, for sticking all the way through till the end with us.
I still feel like there's so much more analysis we could have done.
And we've got
leave it in the comments.
And we've got many more weeks to do it in. So don't worry.
Leave it in the comments, guys.
Yes. Thank you guys. Thank you for letting us show off our...
#Porthos Pride.
I didn't forget this week. I forgot last week. there will be links popping up and things for you to check out. We've been doing some drafts, so you can check those out.
Yes.
We've had Amonkhet openings, you can check those out. We've had the other episodes of JaAR that you can check out. All of those things are on our channel, and right up here, I had the wrong hand.
More to come, guys.
Yes,
More to come.
yes, and right up here is the subscribe button. If you click on that, you can subscribe, and you will find out when all of these videos come out. More JaAR, more Amonkhet openings, more bonus drafts every week. We have moved, and this will not necessarily stay, I can't promise anything, but for the past couple of weeks and for a couple of weeks to come, we have been doing 3 videos a week for all of you, and we hope that you're appreciating it. And let us know if you are. We are done. This is it. We are finished. Thank you so much for watching. As we said, this has been JaAR on Geek for All. I've been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, guys, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks so much, everybody.